And then it shall be free.
What's up, everybody? It's Yeong here with my analysis of both Metal Gear Solid 5 E3 2015 trailers. I really appreciate your patience as I try to wrap my head around what is arguably Kojima's most confusing, cryptic, vague, and intriguing Phantom Pain trailer yet. Before I begin, I'd like to talk a bit about how I structured this analysis. This video will consist of 3 acts. Act 1 is the long E3 2015 trailer footage analysis. Act 2 is the long E3 2015 trailer dialogue analysis. And Act 3 is the short E3 2015 trailer analysis. Within each act, I may occasionally reference contents from other acts, but for the most part, I want to keep them separate to make this analysis flow better. With that out of the way, there is a lot to talk about, so without further ado, let's dive right into it. The trailer begins with a quote by Emil Michel Cioran, a Romanian philosopher, that establishes a major theme of this trailer and of the overall game: language and its influence on the world. The quote basically states that where we belong in the world is defined by the language we speak rather than our birthplace or the nation we inhabit. It's an interesting thought and idea that I'm sure not everyone will agree with, but I think I can relate to what this quote is saying. For those who don't know, both of my parents are Korean, but they moved to Venezuela and I was born there, so my first language was actually Spanish. My second language was Korean, which I learned by speaking with my parents, and finally my third language was English. Now, when people ask me what race I am, I will always say Korean, but the thing is, there is a part of me that doesn't truly feel that way, and I think that this has in large part to do with the fact that Korean is my least proficient language. I know how the language works, and I can speak it and read it and write it and understand it decently, but I forgot a lot of the vocabulary. As a result, I am less comfortable in a culturally Korean environment than I would be in a Hispanic environment or in an American environment. So even though I was raised as a Korean by Korean parents in a Korean environment, I don't always feel Korean. I feel more Venezuelan than anything else. And now that I've been living in America for almost 10 years, I'm starting to feel less Venezuelan and more American because I've been speaking English more than Spanish. Don't get me wrong, I definitely identify myself as Korean. It's in my blood. But sometimes there's that feeling of not quite belonging. So anyway, that's my personal interpretation of the quote. Moving on, let's talk about the philosopher, Emil Michel Cioran. I think he may have had some influence in the creation of Skullface's character. I found out through research that he was born in Razinari, Austria-Hungary in 1911, shortly before the empire dissolved in 1918 after World War I. What was once the Austria-Hungarian Empire is now mostly Hungary and half of Romania. Emil's hometown of Razinari is now Romania, but he still originates from Austria-Hungary, and you know who else is Hungarian? Skullface. And similarly to Emil, whose country Austria-Hungary was taken from him after it dissolved, Skullface's home was stripped from him after it was invaded by foreign soldiers. Furthermore, based on the dialogue spoken throughout the trailer, Skullface seems to share Emil's belief that language is a core aspect of our identity. If you ask me, there are some clear connections between the two that I don't believe to be mere coincidence. Moving on, we are shown the first shot of the trailer, which introduces the fallout of some kind of massacre within Diamond Dogs. Based on the bullet dents on the wall, it's clear that a big firefight took place here. As the camera follows the trickling blood, we are shown one of many dead Diamond Dogs recruits. This could just be me, but he kind of reminds me of the medic from Ground Zeroes. They seem to have similar haircuts and facial structure. I could be way off though. The next shot shows a scientist dead on the ground. I say scientist and not doctor because of the goggles. He is likely a recruit whose highest stats are on either R&D or medical. And I know I just said he's not a doctor, but in medical they also make things like enhanced tranquilizer bullets. We are then shown more dead bodies. Next to them are a bunch of bullet casings that further hint at a massive firefight having taken place. Interesting to note is that the dead soldiers here are wearing the same Diamond Dogs uniform as the ones seen in the gruesome shot at the end of the E3 2014 trailer in which Big Boss shoots his own comrades. This indicates that these two events are somehow connected. The camera then cuts to Big Boss, who walks down the bloody hallway with a time-lapse effect that shows him in his Ground Zeroes form, in his reawakened form, and in his demonic form. I'd like to take a look at the 3 big bosses up close and personal, starting with the Ground Zero's big boss. The injuries on his face tell us that this is definitely after the explosion that caused the helicopter crash that allegedly put Big Boss in a 9-year coma. Now, I truly believe that there is more to the coma than the crash, and I think we got a glimpse of this in the GDC 2013 trailer, which shows Big Boss with the same injuries, same blood splatter on the forehead, and the same cut on the left cheek. I'll even go as far as to say that it's possible the helicopter never crashes, contrary to what Ground Zeroes implies in its final moments, since the scene never shows the impact of the 2 choppers colliding. Furthermore, if you look at the vinyls on Ground Zeroes' chopper and the one in the GDC 2013 trailer scene with a post-injury Big Boss, you can see that both choppers have the numbers 794, so they are definitely the same chopper. It is my belief that somehow, someway, Big Boss's chopper manages to avoid collision, stabilizes itself, and then something else happens that truly puts Big Boss in a 9-year coma. Again, this is just a theory, but it's what makes most sense to me based on what I've seen and analyzed. I would also like to point out the texture on Big Boss's Ground Zero sneaking suit. In my eyes, before the explosion, it has a slight blue hue to it with this very smooth texture with not too much shine on it. But after the explosion, his suit becomes darker and its texture becomes more like latex. It is my belief that the material on Big Boss's sneaking suit burns and melts a bit when the explosion happens, resulting in a shinier and more latex-like texture. If you recall, there was a brief moment in which he was set on fire. We can more clearly see the different textures on Snake's suit before and after the injury in Ground Zeroes' title screens. So my point with all this is that there's a distinction between pre- and post-injury Big Boss, and the fact that the E3 2015 trailer shows the post-injury Big Boss walking about has me thinking that he doesn't just fall into a coma right after Ground Zeroes' cliffhanger. There has to be more to Ground Zeroes' ending than meets the eye. The GDC 2013 trailer somewhat confirmed this, but I think this time-lapse scene in the E3 2015 trailer further hints at it. Big Boss then changes to his reawakened form. At this point, the horn-like debris is clearly visible, but not terribly big. The same blood splatter from the Ground Zeroes Big Boss is used here as well, which I find interesting. I think it's just them reusing assets for convenience sakes. The blood here likely comes from injury during gameplay, since Big Boss gets bloodied up in real time in Phantom Pain. Finally, Big Boss transforms into his demonic form. Like with his previous form, the blood on his face likely stems from the player's actions in the field. The biggest eye-catcher here is the horn. It is freaking huge now, truly evoking the image of a demon. Now, what's interesting is that in the E3 2014 trailer scene showing Big Boss shooting his own soldiers, which I believe to be a preamble to this hallway massacre, the size of the horn is closer to his second form in the time-lapse. This has me thinking that perhaps the horn won't grow during specific moments in the story, but rather with the passage of time. Maybe this is hinting that different players may come across different horn sizes during certain cutscenes and story moments depending on how much time they spend doing other stuff prior. Perhaps players who spend more time doing optional stuff will find themselves having a larger horn in cutscenes than those who rush through the game. We already know that things like the weather system, the day and night cycle, Snake's equipment, and even the blood splattered on Snake during gameplay will all play into Phantom Pain's cutscenes, so who's to say that the size of the horn won't be another dynamic aspect? I could be completely wrong though. Now, what I'm most curious about is the time-lapse. On the one hand, this could actually be how the cutscene looks and plays out, which would mean that Phantom Pain will feature flashbacks. On the other hand, it's possible that Kojima recorded 3 different versions of this scene and edited them together to make it look like a time-lapse, which would confirm 2 things. Horn size and cutscenes can indeed vary, and the game will feature a Ground Zeroes post-injury skin for Big Boss, sneaking suit and everything. Could this be one of those perks of transferring Ground Zeroes data to Phantom Pain? But yeah, there are different implications depending on whether this is how the cutscene looks or if it's just clever editing. I would also like to share my thoughts on what the time-lapse could mean and why Kojima decided to show this sequence in the trailer. The most obvious thing is that it represents Big Boss's gradual transformation into a villain or demon in his quest for vengeance, but I also think that there is a more subtle underlying message. History will repeat itself. In the same way that Ground Zeroes' mother base was destroyed, it is my belief that Phantom Pain's mother base will undergo a similar devastation, with this scene possibly being the aftermath of that. Could this be the end of Mother Base and the beginning of Outer Heaven? The transition has gotta happen at some point, and I'm thinking this might be it. Moving on, we are taken to what looks like either a bathroom or a sanitation area inside a medical bay. I don't know about you, but this scene gives off the feeling that this place is closing up shop, perhaps further hinting at the end of Mother Base and the beginning of Outer Heaven. Also interesting to note about this shot is the custom DD logo on the weapon crate. So it looks like custom emblems will apply to a variety of facets within Mother Base and not just the shoulder sleeve insignia. Finally, to the left, you will find a camouflaged cardboard box. It's kind of funny seeing the cardboard box sitting there amidst this incredible armory. The camera then zooms in on the small counter below the mirror, and on it is a variety of interesting things. I would first like to point out the medical tweezers and scissors. This could be indication that this room does indeed reside within a medical bay. Now, something interesting to note is that these are the same scissors and tweezers used during Ground Zeroes to remove Paz's stitches before her brutal operation. Hard to say if there is any meaning there. On the one hand, the scene could just be reusing assets, and on the other, it could somehow be alluding to that scene. Unfortunately, there is too little context at this point to know for sure. I would also like to point out the capsules and tablets. These are very similar to the one seen flailing in the Jeep that Snake makes his escape in during the hospital scene, except the capsules are blue here instead of green. I am no medical expert, so I couldn't tell you what these do, but if any of you know about medicine and these remind you of something, be sure to let us know in the comments below. Just keep in mind that the medicine must have existed within the 80s, which is when Phantom Pain takes place. Next, I'd like to take a look at this bullet. Notice how it's all bloodied up. If you ask me, I think this is indication that somebody performed a self-operation here to dig this bullet out of their body, possibly Snake. This would explain the splotches of blood throughout the counter and the bloodstains on the tweezers. There is also a syringe on the counter, which might be some kind of painkiller. On the bottom right here, you will find this high-tech rod. If you look closely, you will find a grenade symbol engraved on it, so maybe this is some kind of rod-shaped grenade. Then again, I've never seen a grenade like this before, so if you guys have a better idea, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. On the top left, you will find some kind of case with the Fox logo on it. I think this might be the case for the cassette. Notice how they are identical in size. As for the cassette tape itself, it's a Sony BHF-46, a real-life brand of cassettes. You can actually go to eBay right now and find people selling these off. Written on the front is "From the Man Who Sold the World," a reference to David Bowie's song "The Man Who Sold the World." The song itself is actually quite interesting. In its most basic form, it's about a man's confrontation with an alternate persona or doppelganger, as well as his struggle to find his own identity. So perhaps this is a hint that the cassette tape here is from Big Boss's alter ego, of which there are currently two candidates, Zero and Skullface. Between those two, my money is on Skullface. Zero may be an antagonistic force to Big Boss, but he's not really an alter ego. Skullface, on the other hand, has a backstory that somewhat parallels Big Boss's, which I'll talk more about during the dialogue analysis. And he is part of a unit with a name and emblem that are literally mirror images of the Fox units, which Big Boss used to be a part of. There's also the fact that Ocelot talks about Skullface as the camera zooms in towards the cassette.
When he was a young boy, he lost his native language.
This is even directly followed by a shot of Skullface from Ground Zeroes. Everything seems to point to Skullface being the man who sold the world. Now, it's very important that you interpret the song's title correctly. Most of you will think that the title refers to a man who gave away the world for something in return, but in reality, it refers to a man who convinced the world or sold the world of something. In David Bowie's case, and this is just one interpretation, he's referring to an identity or image of himself that he sold to the world. David Bowie was known to have been struggling with identity at the time, which shows through the lyrics of the song, in which he seems to be talking to another self. And at one point in his career, he even created an alternate androgynous persona called Ziggy Stardust and presented himself as such during concerts and what have you. So one interpretation of the song's title is that it refers to how he sold the world images and personas of himself. If we apply this knowledge to the title on this cassette tape, this could very well be a hint that Skullface sold the world something, perhaps an image or persona of himself as he struggled with his identity. Maybe the man we know as Skullface is the equivalent to Ziggy Stardust, a mask hiding his true identity. Keep in mind that, like David Bowie, Skullface also struggled with his identity, as it is something that was stripped away from him at a young age, according to Ocelot.
When he was a young boy, he lost his native language, the bedrock for any developing child. His country, His family, his face, his identity, everything was stolen from him.
I don't know, it's all pretty vague and crazy, so I'm sure there are other ways to interpret the title on the cassette tapes. In the next shot, Big Boss inserts the tape into the Walkman and hits the play button. A few things to note about the Walkman. Like the tape itself, it's a real-life product. Its exact brand is the WM-R55, and according to website SonyVintage.com, it was released on July 1st, 1985. Now, normally I would assume that time must have passed and that it's 1985 by the time this cutscene plays, but this exact same Walkman can also be found in Ground Zeroes. It's the same one that Skullface hands to Chico, and it's also the same one that Big Boss uses to listen to cassette tapes. So it looks like Kojima doesn't care about the exact release dates for brands and products as long as they are within that era, so this cutscene likely still occurs in 1984. Now, something that I initially found weird is that Big Boss isn't using headphones here. According to my research on the WM-R55, it doesn't have any speakers, so headphones are needed to listen to tapes. But then I realized that in Ground Zeroes, Big Boss uses his Walkman without headphones during gameplay, which can only mean that it's been custom modded and retrofitted to play through the codec earpiece and to interface with the iDroid.
Use your iDroid to listen to it.
The one thing that I'm not sure about is the smudge of blood here, which looks like a thumbprint, although the way the blood trails does have me thinking that it was forcibly pulled away. We are then taken to the hospital scene shown in the GDC 2013 trailer. The two scenes are almost the same, but there's clearly a new filter here that gives this scene a moodier and more somber atmosphere in my opinion. Furthermore, the lighting is less overblown and oversaturated, with shadows acting much more realistically. There also seems to be more detail on certain objects like the Fox insignia. Everything else is pretty much the same. I would like to note once again that Big Boss's post-injury suit here looks slightly burned and latexy. The next shot shows Pequod moving around Afghanistan. This is likely some kind of intro or outro cutscene for the setting, and I'll get to why a little later. We are then taken back to the hospital, and once again, lights and shadows react more realistically, bringing out more detail from objects like the medic's coat. This is then followed by a shot of Pequod moving through Africa. Notice how similar this is to the Afghanistan shot, which tells me that it's some kind of intro or outro cutscene that will be featured in all of Phantom Pain's settings. After one last shot of the hospital, which once again shows less overblown lighting, more realistic shadows, and more detailed objects, we are shown the Kojima Productions logo without the words Kojima Productions. Kojima's name is something that Konami has been trying to avoid since the debacle began, so I guess I shouldn't be too surprised. Well, at least we get to see the logo. We are then taken to a scene shown in the E3 2014 trailer, this time with different lighting that can likely be attributed to the game's day and night cycle, which does apply to cutscenes. Next up is a shot from Ground Zeroes, and it's literally identical to the cutscene found in the game, so not much to analyze here, although we do get a good look at pre-injury Big Boss, whose suit doesn't have that shiny, latex-like texture that post-injury Big Boss has. We are then shown a new shot of Kaz, who doesn't look too happy about losing his arm. Not much to analyze here, except that this is part of the cutscene that plays as Kaz is being transported to Mother Base after his rescue. After another shot from Ground Zeroes, the trailer shifts back to Kaz, who is being unloaded from the chopper. I love the amount of detail that's on his disheveled face and neck, from the cuts, bruises, and injuries to little details like droplets of sweat. Just fantastic attention to detail. I would also like to point out that this shot in particular likely happens after Kaz's conversation with Big Boss in the beginning of the Red Band E3 2013 trailer, and before the Whoa-Ho scene. This next shot likely happens after the Whoa-Ho scene, right before Kaz is loaded onto the trolley bed, like in the E3 2014 trailer. Now, it seems as though the camera here has been slightly raised. Minor changes in framing and camera movement from previous footage is something that you'll see a lot throughout this trailer. Before we move on, I'd like to rewind for a second to point out these posters in the background. I can only make out this one, which says, "Safety First." Posters like these can be seen scattered throughout Mother Base in this trailer. And there's one in particular later on that caught my attention, but I'll talk about it when the time comes. We are then taken to a scene showing Snake handing Code Talker some kind of pipe. Hard to say what's going on, but judging by the candles in the background, I think it's safe to say that it's the same location as the one shown in the E3 2013 trailer, except the lighting on the candles has been improved since then. The trailer then takes us to a shot of Mother Base. It looks somewhat barren compared to other footage that I've seen, so my assumption is that this cutscene plays when Big Boss is introduced to his new Mother Base, right after Kaz's rescue and before Kaz is loaded onto the trolley bed. Moving on is a scene showing Kaz interrogating Quiet. This is probably right before they start torturing her with this apparatus, as shown in the Red Band E3 2013 trailer. Hard to say if this is something sanctioned by Big Boss, considering the bond they come to develop, but then again we see him sanction Huey's torture in the E3 2014 trailer, so maybe it's not too far-fetched, at least towards the early stages of their relationship. We then see Huey being tortured by Ocelot with some kind of injection, probably a drug of sorts that causes pain. At this point, we see Huey strapped to the chair tipped over, having lost his glasses in the process, so the torture has probably gone on for a while now. Initially, I thought maybe the injection is the same one we see on the counter in front of the mirror, but the one Ocelot is using is white, not black, so we can rule that out. Now here is something very interesting. If we pause at the right moment, we can see that Kaz's eyes are faded out. Initially, I assumed that Kaz had been blinded during his capture, but then I started looking through footage of him and realized that he doesn't act blind. He makes eye contact with people and points of interest, and he never seems to be using his other senses to gain awareness of his surroundings like blind people would. The only conclusion that can be made here is that Kaz isn't blind, and not just because he doesn't act like it. There are actually others throughout this trailer and past trailers who seem to have the same affliction on the eyes, with an example being Code Talker. My theory, and I think the theory of many others, is that the faded eyes are a sign of some kind of sickness or infection. Let's leave it at that for now. I'll dive deeper into this theory once we explore the trailer further, but for now, put a pin on this one. We are then shown a very cool shot of Diamond Dog's recruits lining up for Kaz. This is probably a celebration of sorts commemorating Kaz's return. While it's established that Big Boss will be in charge of Mother Base, I think this scene shows that Kaz will have more leadership influence than in his MSF days. After all, Kaz did lead and train these dissident soldiers for many years while Big Boss slumbered. This is followed by a shot of Snake and Kaz walking towards Air Command Center. Notice the rain here, which shows off more of how dynamic weather and the day and night cycle will apply to cutscenes. Snake's camo in this particular scene reminds me of the DPM from past games, although I'm not an expert in this field, so I could be wrong. Then, after being shown the title card, Eye for an Eye, which reinforces Phantom Pain's theme of revenge, we are shown an injured recruit being carried away on a trolley bed. If we pause at the right moment, you can see that there are cages in the background. These cages are likely the outdoor brigs that various MGS5 preview articles talked about, which can only mean that this scene takes place on a brig platform, which was also mentioned in MGS5 preview articles. The cages actually remind me a lot of the ones in Camp Omega, although at least Diamond Dogs has the decency to include a toilet and a modest bed in them. I do recall one of the MGS5 preview articles saying that they saw Quiet suntanning in her cell, belly down with her top undone, and that probably happens inside one of these cages, on one of these beds. I'll certainly be on the lookout for that. For science. As the camera keeps panning, we eventually get a brief glimpse of what looks to be a tent of sorts. It looks like tents are among things that will be scattered throughout Mother Base, which is interesting. What purpose they serve is hard to say. I'm thinking that it's a little outpost or rest area for guards who are keeping an eye on prisoners. Maybe this is where guards go to refresh once their shift is over. It could also be a small medical station, which is perhaps where this injured guard is being taken to. Now, I wonder how the guard got injured in the first place. Maybe he tried to get all kinky with Quiet and she, wasn't interested. I don't know. In the next shot, we see what seems to be part of the infighting shown in the E3 2014 trailer. I think I know exactly where this fits. There's one scene in the E3 2014 trailer in which we see a soldier kicking another soldier in the face and knocking him down, after which he picks up a knife. I think what happens is that as soon as he picks up the knife, he goes to attack the downed soldier without hesitation, and that's when Big Boss finally steps in to stop the fight. You can actually see the downed soldier from the E3 2014 trailer trying to get back up. This footage makes it look like the soldier is attacking Big Boss, but I don't think anyone would even dare do something like that. He's definitely going for the downed soldier in the E3 2014 trailer, and Big Boss stops this nonsense in the one way he knows how, being a fucking boss. And after this debacle, I think that's when this scene happens, in which Big Boss is teaching the soldier who drew the knife a lesson by forcing him to stab his own leader, as if saying, if you're willing to kill your own teammate, I guess you're okay with killing me as well, you stupid fucking dumbass, or something along those lines. Something else I would like to draw your attention to are these two Big Boss is watching you posters on the wall. In my opinion, they look quite similar to the safety first poster seen earlier. They all seem to follow the same template, words at the top and bottom and some kind of logo, emblem, or image in the middle. This has me thinking that maybe players will be able to make custom posters that can be placed throughout Mother Base. If not, then fuck, Big Boss is some kind of dictator or something. So anyway, we are then shown yet another familiar scene from E3 2014, with the soldiers getting all riled up about something. And like I stated in the E3 2014 trailer analysis, I think someone's being brought in, possibly Huey, who is suspected of playing a major role in the destruction of MSF Mother Base. I would also like to note that the latest version of this scene has brighter lighting with more pronounced reds, more prominent lens flares, and a slightly lowered camera. Moving on, we are shown a new part of the cremation scene from the E3 2014 trailer. This scene made me realize something. The cremation actually happens outside. For the longest time, I thought that the E3 2014 cremation scene took place in a spacious interior within Mother Base because of the dark lighting, and I thought these were interior walls in the back. But as it turns out, they are part of Mother Base's exterior infrastructure. Whereas the E3 2014 version of the scene takes place at night, this version takes place during the day, and it gives off a whole different vibe. Yet another example of the day and night cycle coming into play in cutscenes. Now, judging from the fact that Big Boss, Kaz, and the soldiers are no longer present, perhaps the ceremony has concluded at this point, and the rest of the cremation has been left up to a few recruits and Ocelot. I would also like to note that the orientation of the coffins has been changed. In the E3 2014 trailer, they were placed horizontally, but here, they are placed vertically. The next scene in the trailer shows us Big Boss turning to look at something. Interesting to note about this particular shot is that the right corners of the screen fade to black, in a very similar fashion to what Naked Snake's first-person view looks like during Snake Eater after his right eye was damaged. I've heard a few people say that this could be indication that this is being shown through the first-person perspective of the real Big Boss, with this allegedly fake Big Boss turning to look at him, but I simply don't believe this to be true. A, Big Boss is looking towards the left of the camera, not directly at it. B, the camera doesn't move like a person would, as it zooms in kinetically like a camera. And C, nobody is reacting to the camera. If the camera were a person, Kaz would give him a glance or move out of the way due to how close together they are, and Ocelot would also react and look towards the camera as well, but none of this is happening. It's almost as if they're acting like the camera doesn't exist, which is exactly what actors of a scene are supposed to do unless the camera is meant to represent someone's first-person perspective or unless the fourth wall is being broken, but none of those things is happening. I honestly think that the shadowed right corners is just cinematic effect or a result of the room's dim lighting. Maybe you'll disagree. If so, let me know your theories in the comments below. Now, this next shot is really intriguing. This is without a doubt one of the AI pods from Peace Walker. If I had to guess which one, I would say this is undoubtedly the mammal pod, which housed the boss's AI. First of all, notice how the scene plays as Zero is talking about the boss.
The world that the boss envisioned will finally become a reality, and it will make mankind whole again.
It is my belief that Kojima consciously decided to make the dialogue coincide with this scene as a hint. Also, notice how pristine it looks, with nary a dent to be found. I believe there is a reason for this, and the explanation can be found in this cutscene from Peace Walker.
Snake, destroy the AI inside the mammal pod!
The inner barrier protecting the mammal pod is designed to be as strong as a bomb shelter.
What's it gonna take to get through?
I guess an atomic bomb will do it.
You trying to be funny?
No, I'm telling you, that armor was designed to withstand a nuclear war.
Out of all the AI pods, the mammal pod was the only one that was designed to be as strong as a bomb shelter. Whereas other AI pods could be shot and destroyed with bullets, the mammal pod would deflect bullets with ease. According to Huey, it takes an atomic bomb to remotely have a chance of denting this thing. And therein lies the answer to why this AI pod looks almost as good as new. I say almost because if you look closely, you can actually see some rust in various parts of the pod's outer shell, particularly around the seams. This brings me to another point. With water being a very efficient compound for rusting metal, I think that the rust is indication that this AI pod was dug out of a large body of water, which is in line with what happened to the mammal pod at the end of Peace Walker. If you recall, the boss's AI within the mammal pod took control over Peace Walker and sank itself into a nearby lake to prevent an all-out nuclear war. My theory is that at one point in Phantom Pain, the mammal pod is detached from Peace Walker and then dug out of the lake and brought back to Mother Base. For the cherry on top, I would like to direct your attention to this tweet by Lori Allen, the voice actress for the boss. When asked by fans if she would be working on Phantom Pain, her response was, "Maybe so." I think we can all agree that this is pretty much a yes. Ever since this tweet, a lot of people have been pondering ways in which the boss would return for Phantom Pain. A hallucination? A flashback, perhaps? I'm thinking that Lori Allen might be reprising her role as the mammal pod. So I think I've made my point. I'm 95% sure this is the mammal pod. Now, what it'll be used for is hard to say. Maybe Huey will retrofit it to work with Diamond Dog's or Outer Heaven's Metal Gear. Who knows? What I do know is that they do eventually get it up and running. If we go back to this previous scene showing the rowdy soldiers, you may notice that all the way to the left here is a can-shaped object that's glowing red towards the top. Yup, that is without a doubt a functional AI pod. In fact, the interior with the rowdy soldiers and the interior in which the AI pod is craned in are the same place. In the former, we see red lighting emanating from the left, possibly from the active AI pod. In the latter, the AI pod isn't active, so maybe that's why the room doesn't have that red hue. The presence of the AI pod also gives the scene with the rowdy soldiers more context. I previously theorized that maybe the soldiers are riled up because of the presence of a traitor, possibly Huey. Now I'm thinking I might have been on the right track. Perhaps Huey is making his way towards the AI pod to check on it. And while he is doing so, he's being harassed by the Diamond Dog soldiers for his previous treachery. It looks like the full picture for this scene may be coming together with the AI pod in place. But again, these are just theories and assumptions. Now, for those wondering, Yong, how come you didn't see this when the scene was shown during the E3 2014 trailer? That's because if you look at that version of the footage, you will notice that there is no AI pod to be found. It's only there in the E3 2015 trailer. Yup, the developers actually went out of their way to exclude assets in previous trailers to avoid spoilers. We will see another example of this in later footage. Alright, let's move on. After another revenge-themed title card, we are shown one of the most mind-boggling parts of the trailer, the return of Paz. As you can see, this is the exact same scar that Paz had in Ground Zeroes. Even the stitching pattern and the fact that stitches were only removed on the right side of the V shape are identical. We even get to see Paz in the flesh in the next shot, with her hair grown out and everything. Now, I've heard some people suggest that the V-shaped scar might belong to someone else and that when the scene cuts to Paz here, it's a different scene altogether, possibly a flashback of the events following her rescue from the sea after her encounter with Big Boss. But that's just not possible. Look at the gloves here. These are the same gloves from Big Boss's Phantom Pain sneaking suit. This is without a doubt happening in Phantom Pain's setting. I honestly have no earthly idea how she survived the bomb. A popular theory is that Zero may have found a way to clone Paz. After all, Zero and Dr. Clark have been experimenting with cloning for a while now for the Les Enfants Terribles project, and Paz has been an agent of Cypher since she was very young, so the idea that she became a subject of cloning at one point, voluntarily or involuntarily, isn't completely outside of the realm of possibility. If we assume this is true, this would mean that between the Ground Zeroes Paz and the Phantom Pain Paz, one of them is the original from Peace Walker and the other one is the clone. If we assume that the Ground Zero's pause is the original, this would mean that the pause we knew from Peace Walker is dead, and the pause in Phantom Pain has a clean slate memory. On the other hand, if we assume that Phantom Pain's pause is the original, this would mean that they swapped the pause we knew from Peace Walker with a clone whose head was shaved and was rigged with bombs. I honestly couldn't tell you which one is more likely, and I couldn't even tell you if this clone theory has any ground. It's just something that I figured I would throw out there since I can't think of any other explanation. Now, before I move on, I would like to talk a bit about Paz's eyes. There is debate that Paz's eyes are green here instead of her usual blue, and I thought so too at first, but upon closer inspection, I'm beginning to think that they are blue eyes that look green as a result of the dim lighting. The fact of the matter is that under certain lighting conditions, blue eyes can look slightly green, like with Big Boss's eyes. If anything, the one with the weird eye color is the Ground Zero's pause, and in fact, I've always thought she looked a bit off, although that could have just been attributed to the lack of hair. If I really had to choose, my money would be on the Ground Zero's pause with the shaved head being the clone. I'm thinking that maybe the pause that Skullface tortured, the one we hear in the Ground Zero's cassette tapes, is the one that we see in Phantom Pain, while the pause they chained up for Big Boss to rescue was a clone who was beaten up prior to make it look like she was tortured and was implanted with bombs to kill Big Boss. A decoy clone, if you will. And maybe the reason that this alleged decoy clone pause has short hair is because she's a clone. As far as I remember, there isn't any mention of her hair being shaved in any of the cassette tapes, so maybe the real Paz had all her hair while she was being tortured, whereas the decoy clone Paz's hair just started growing out because she was hatched recently or something. I don't know, I'm really reaching here, so if I were you, I wouldn't put all my faith on this theory. If you have any better ideas, let us know in the comments below. Things get even more bizarre in the next shot as we are shown Big Boss pulling out a headphone from an African man's incised throat, who is somehow still alive. I think Skullface had a hand in this somehow, since this is reminiscent of how Chico had a headset plug inserted into his chest during his imprisonment in Camp Omega. I would also like to draw your attention to the man's eyes. Notice how they have a very similar shade to Kaz's eyes. I believe that he too is infected. Again, put a pin on this one for now. I'll come back to this and elaborate further at a more appropriate time. As the camera pans, you can see that there are a bunch of cables laying on top of a blood-soaked cement floor. Perhaps this is some kind of abandoned lab in which people were being experimented on, possibly with the infection I've been referring to. Again, I'll elaborate further later. Moving on, we see Big Boss carrying a pretty badly burned Quiet. I don't know what the hell happened here, but I'm thinking this might be part of her optional support buddy storyline. Maybe a Diamond Dogs recruit who is highly against Quiet's presence in Mother Base did this, or maybe something went wrong during training. We are then taken back to the African man, who is shown to have some kind of condition in the lungs area and its surrounding tissue. It looks rather nasty. This further reinforces the theory that this man has some kind of infection, which could also be the case for Kaz and Code Talker, who have the same faded shade of eyes. Now, one thing I would like to note before I move on is that this reminds me a lot of the one scene in the E3 2014 trailer in which we see one of the African children lying down breathing heavily. Is he also infected? Does Snake perhaps draw his knife to end his misery? Food for thought. The trailer then shows us another title card, Skull for Skull, which is appropriately followed by a showcase of female skulls. Judging by the flora in the background here, there is little doubt that this is Africa. As the camera zooms in, 4 ghostly specters begin materializing. Initially, we can barely make out their skeletal structure, but as they start to appear, you can briefly see their internal tissues. Look familiar? Well, that's because Quiet materializes in a very similar manner. This got me thinking, what if Quiet was part of the experiment involving the creation of the skulls? Like the skulls, internal organs become visible when she materializes. She can jump incredible heights, run at superhuman speeds, etc. But the icing on the cake is that Quiet has the same black mascara as the female skulls do. You heard correctly. If you look closely at the female skull's face in the E3 2015 trailer, you can see mascara spreading from her eyes with a very similar pattern to Quiet's. It is my belief that Quiet was once a subject of this super soldier experiment and was in the process of being transformed into a skull, but somehow managed to escape before she was fully zombified. And on the subject of the Skull Super Soldier experiment, I think now is a good time to talk about the infection, because I believe that the skulls and the infection are correlated. I say this because if you look at the skull's eyes, both male and female versions, they have faded pupils like Kaz, Code Talker, and the African man with the infected lungs. It is my belief that the infection plays a role in brainwashing and zombifying humans and in prepping them to be retrofitted into skulls. This is further evidenced by the fact that the skulls are part of what's called the parasite unit, which perhaps suggests the involvement of some kind of parasite or infection in their making. Now, this infection probably comes with lethal side effects if not regulated in a controlled environment. And I think we get a glimpse of that in the next shot, which shows us a horde of delirious soldiers making their way towards Snake and Quiet. Notice how the particle effects emanating from their heads are the same combination of black and neon green particles that occasionally emanate from the skulls. I think that the particles indicate that they are being mind controlled by skulls through infection. I spotted 3 skulls total in this scene, who unlike the afflicted guards don't have any particles spewing from their heads. There is one here in the foreground, one all the way in the back, and another towards the side. Interesting to note is that the 2 closest to the camera are in a half-materialized state. I think this is further indication that the skulls are indeed controlling these soldiers. My theory is that when they are in mind control mode, they dematerialize slightly because of the energy they are spending controlling their minions. One basis for this theory is the fact that only the 2 half-dematerialized skulls are surrounded by zombified soldiers, while the one who is all by himself in the back here is fully materialized, maybe because he doesn't have any soldiers to control around him. Speaking of the zombified soldiers, I know who they are. If we jump to the short E3 2015 trailer, there is a scene that shows a troop of heavily armed soldiers who are dressed with the same Boy Scout-like outfit. Some of them are even wearing golden watches like the infected soldiers. These are definitely not Diamond Dog's recruits, as noted by the fact that they aren't wearing the Diamond Dog's insignia on their left shoulder sleeve, which is where the insignia of the current unit goes. Unfortunately, I couldn't tell you what unit this insignia represents, since I'm no expert in the field. But if you have an idea, please let us know in the comments below. What I do know is that these are definitely enemy soldiers. I can also tell you that this is definitely Africa, and that these guys will probably get ambushed and zombified by skulls at one point. Before moving on, I would like to rewind and analyze the female skulls. In classic Kojima fashion, they are introduced with some beautiful boob shots, proving that the Kojima humor and touch is very much present in Phantom Pain despite its more serious tone. The overall design of their suit is quite similar to their male counterparts. They have the same bulky headphones, the same black overlay that goes over their shoulders and down their arms, which comes equipped with distinguishing features like the bulky neck collar, a tight chest strap, thick tubes, and cylinder tanks situated on each shoulder blade, and both versions even wear the same tight gray suits underneath the black overlay, which feature distinguishable patterns like the diagonal zippers on each side of the body. The female skulls do kind of remind me a bit of the beauties from MGS4 in terms of design, especially the barcode situated on the chest, but I don't actually think that they are in any way related, except for the fact that both are manufactured and enhanced female super soldiers. But I'm assuming that Kojima and Shinkawa did draw a bit of inspiration from their previous work. Now, one thing that female skulls have that male skulls don't is this cybernetic eye patch. Notice how similar it looks to the one that Snake is wearing in terms of design. It's got a very similar shape, and it even has the same 3-strap design. You know what would be really cool? If Snake could at one point borrow this technology and have Mother Base develop his own cybernetic eye patch. It'd be pretty freaking badass to see Big Boss with his own version of the solid eye. They could call it the naked eye or the venom eye. I can only hope that the similar designs is a hint of sorts. Something else that I noticed about the cybernetic eye patch is that the lens has a very similar shape to Gray Fox's eye, so this could be a nod to the iconic character, although a key difference is that Gray Fox's cybernetic eye glows on the cornea, while the female skull cybernetic eye glows on the pupil. Moving on, I'd like to go back to the zombie horde scene and talk about Snake and Quiet here, who seem to have survived a helicopter crash. One thing that instantly caught my eye is the blood splattered all over Quiet. This seems to indicate that support buddies can also get bloodied up, not just Snake. Now, I find it interesting that Quiet is in this cutscene at all. Something that's been stated by Kojima and proven by the MGS5 preview articles is that Quiet is a completely optional character, which by extension means that any cutscene she's a part of might be optional as well. In other words, I think this right here isn't part of the main story, but rather some kind of optional story mission for Quiet, in which case the emphasis that is being placed on the skulls could be further indication of Quiet's connection with the creatures. Then again, who knows, maybe cutscenes and Phantom Pain will be dynamic enough to accommodate for different support buddies that players might bring along, in which case this cutscene could just as easily be for a main mission. One last thing I would like to note about this scene is the setting. I already said it's Africa, but more specifically, I think this location might be nearby this area in the Red Band E3 2013 trailer, as can be deduced from the fact that both scenes feature a tank as well as a square-shaped watchtower. Next up is a scene showing Snake being held upside down by some kind of mechanical arm. Unfortunately, the skull's gas is too thick to see where the arm is coming from, but I'm pretty sure that it's a part of the ST-84 Metal Gear, which is the Metal Gear we see at the end of the E3 2014 trailer, and also throughout this trailer, the name of which was first unveiled through a promotional video for Phantom Pain Special Edition. Now, if you look closely at the concept art here, you can actually see blueprints for a mechanical hand in the background, and like the one in the E3 2015 trailer, it has 3 fingers and 2 opposable thumbs. They are definitely the same mechanical hand. So it looks like the ST-84 can be upgraded with an arm, which treads new territory for Metal Gears. Hell, even D-Walker can be equipped with a mechanical arm, as shown in the E3 2015 gameplay demo. Next up is another scene showing the male skulls, this time in Afghanistan. Unlike in the E3 2013 trailer, they now have glowing green eyes, which makes them even creepier than they already were. We are then taken to another crazy scene, this time showing giant rock spikes bursting from the ground going after Snake. This could be one of two things. Either this is some kind of illusion caused by the debris in Snake's brain, or this is part of a boss battle that we haven't been introduced to yet. Regardless, this looks pretty incredible. The trailer then takes us to a brutal scene showing an XOF chopper crashing into this building with its rotor blades tearing nearby soldiers apart. If you look at the equipment that they're wearing and the weapons that they're carrying, I think you will agree that there is little doubt that this is part of the hospital scene. Now, before the rotor blades start tearing everyone apart, you may notice that the soldiers are shooting at something towards the left. Perhaps the man on fire made an unexpected appearance. Now, I did go frame by frame to see if anybody got split in two or anything of the like, but all I saw was a bunch of blood and some huge knockback, so it looks like the game may not feature live dismemberment. Obviously, the game features characters with dismembered limbs like Snake and Kaz, but that's stuff that happened behind the scenes. But who knows, maybe it's too early to tell. Chaos continues in the next shot as well, where we see Snake wearing a gas mask, the same one that was hinted at during the chicken cap announcement. He's inside what looks to be Mother Base in flames, possibly one of its indoor brigs based on the prison cells inside the room from which these 2 Diamond Dogs recruits are coming out from, bursting in flames. Based on the fact that the cell door is open, perhaps this is indication that one of the prisoners, possibly supernatural in nature, escaped and caused this fire in the process. Interesting to note is the iDroid lying on the ground here. Did Snake drop it here at one point, or is it somebody else's iDroid? This dead guy's perhaps? Hard to say for sure. Next, we are shown Snake and Quiet inside a turbulent chopper that will probably crash soon, judging by the downed pilot. This is probably the prelude to the zombie scene we saw before, in which we see Snake and Quiet standing in front of a crashed chopper. There is even a skull lurking outside, who probably played a role in causing the situation. Now, at first I thought the skull might have been holding on to the chopper until he couldn't hold on anymore, but if you look closely, it almost looks like he's floating around the chopper, which has me wondering if flying or hovering is another one of their abilities. I would also like to point out that this particular skull is wearing a different mask than the rest. Instead of wearing a gas mask, this one seems to be wearing some kind of high-tech headgear that covers his eyes, leaving his mouth and chin exposed. So it looks like skulls will not only come in different genders, but also with varying equipment. The trailer then takes us back to Afghanistan to show what is likely Skullface leading Big Boss to the hangar that is housing the ST-84 Metal Gear. In the background are a bunch of burned corpses. I couldn't tell you who they belong to, but I initially thought these might be the same burned corpses from the beginning of the E3 2014 trailer. But transporting burned corpses all the way to Afghanistan just doesn't make sense. In fact, as the camera keeps panning, you can actually see a pile of corpses being burned on the spot. Next up is a shot of Eli, aka obviously Liquid. As the camera pans out, we are shown a rather nasty platter here, a rotten pig head of sorts. You can actually see this pig head in the E3 2014 trailer for a brief second, so these two scenes definitely take place in the same location. I believe that the rotten pig head is a reference to two things, one of which is Big Boss. If you take a look at Eli's back in the E3 2014 trailer, you can see that there is a pig head with an eye patch on the right side inscribed on his shirt. And if we look at the pig head in the E3 2015 trailer, you can see that its right eye has been gouged out. This seems to be symbolic of Liquid's hate towards his father, Big Boss, for allegedly giving him the recessive genes. Although as fans should know by now, Liquid is in reality the clone with the dominant genes. The second thing this shot is likely a reference to is a novel by Nobel Prize-winning English author William Golding called Lord of the Flies, which has also been adapted into movies. Basically, Lord of the Flies is about a group of British boys stuck on an uninhabited island in the Pacific Ocean after being the only survivors of a plane crash. To survive, these boys attempt to govern themselves, naming a boy named Ralph the leader, but it all ends disastrously. At its core, the novel portrays the boys' descent to savagery, showing how well-educated children regress to a primitive state. There comes a point in the story in which the boys come to develop paranoia about the island, believing that there is some kind of beast lurking within. The leader, Ralph, does his best to keep order and to assure the rest that no such beast exists. But then another boy, Jack, who has started a power struggle against Ralph, boldly claims that he will find this beast and kill it. Eventually, Jack breaks away from Ralph and forms his own tribe, luring members of the main group by hosting a feast of cooked pig. At one point, members of this tribe begin to enact bizarre rituals like painting their faces and making sacrifices to the beast. One of the offerings was a severed pig head, which Jack skewers on a stick that has been sharpened on both ends and impaled to the ground. A boy named Simon, an epileptic, stumbles upon the skewered pig head at one point and begins to believe that it's talking to him. He envisions the pig head, now swarming with flies, as the Lord of the Flies, and the pig head tells Simon that the boys themselves created the beast, with the real beast residing inside them all. Yup, pretty bizarre stuff. According to my research, the pig head, aka the Lord of the Flies, is meant to represent the beast, demon, and evil within the hearts of mankind. It's also interesting to note that Lord of the Flies is the literal translation of Beelzebub, an Arabic word that is used as another name for the devil. So not only does the pighead in Phantom Pain reference Big Boss in physical appearance through resemblances like the right eye patch on the drawing on the back of Eli's shirt, and the gouged right eye on the pighead, it is also alluding to the Lord of the Flies. This is quite literally the Lord of the Flies in the image of Big Boss, symbolizing and foreshadowing that Big Boss will be transforming into a beast, demon, or devil, descending further and further into the depths of hell as his lust for revenge and the darkness inside him takes over. This is something that has already been conveyed in previous footage through the demonic horn and tail, but this pig head is a subtler representation of that. It's actually pretty fucking cool how Kojima managed to make these allusions and connections so perfectly. And then there's the fact that the boys from Lord of the Flies were British, further confirming that Eli is indeed none other than Liquid, who, as we know, was moved to England at a very young age and came to develop a British accent. Another important allusion to Lord of the Flies is the conch shell strapped to Eli's left hip. Towards the beginning of the novel, not long after the crash, Ralph stumbles upon a conch, which he uses as a horn to alert possible survivors to his location and to gather them in one area. Because Ralph was responsible for bringing all the survivors together, he was elected as leader of the group. After the boys band together, they eventually agree that only the boy holding the conch may speak at meetings to avoid arguments and chaos, and that the conch should be passed around to those who wish to voice their thoughts and opinions. In the novel, the conch symbolizes leadership as well as democracy, civility, and order. As the story progresses, the conch's once vibrant colors begin to fade, symbolizing the fading of order, and once chaos kicks in, the conch is smashed to pieces in a climactic moment of the story. Could the fact that Eli is holding a conch shell in a similar fashion to Ralph from Lord of the Flies be indication that Eli is the leader of a group of child soldiers keeping some type of order in the area? Could this also mean that there will come a point in which Eli's leadership and the order that he has established will crumble like a house of cards like with Ralph in the novel? And could these references to Lord of the Flies be hinting that Eli and whatever group he may be involved in will at some point for whatever reason descend to savagery and a primitive state like the boys in the novel? Possibly. The references are very clear and really freaking cool. Alright, I think I've talked enough about that subject. Bottom line is, the pig head represents Big Boss and foreshadows his transformation into a demon, and the conch shell could be alluding that Eli may play a leadership role that is similar to Ralph in Lord of the Flies, one that will possibly descend to chaos and savagery. The trailer then proceeds by showing us a close-up of Quiet, giving us a close look at the mascara, which once again is something that the female skulls have as well, further solidifying a connection between the two. The mascara is clearly shaped in the form of a butterfly, which goes in line with the name of her various sniper rifles, such as the Wicked Butterfly and the Guilty Butterfly. Interestingly, butterflies have been referenced quite a bit throughout Big Boss's saga. In Snake Eater, we see Naked Snake reshaping the heart-shaped C3 into a butterfly, throwing it up in the air, catching it, and saying, "Gotcha this time," in reference to the fact that he couldn't catch a butterfly in the cave after his eye injury. In Peace Walker, the butterfly played an even bigger part, with each subsequent AI weapon being named after the different stages of a butterfly: pupa, chrysalis, cocoon, and imago, and it also represented things like death and rebirth, as well as transformation. I wonder if Phantom Pain's butterfly imagery will touch on these themes or if it'll represent something different altogether. We'll see. We are then given a close-up of Code Talker, who is smoking the pipe that Snake hands him in a previous shot. He seems to be wearing a pendant made out of turquoise, which is a stone that is often used for Navajo jewelry. As mentioned before, his eyes have the same faded shade as Kaz, the African man, and the skulls, which has me thinking that the infection is something they all have in common. This next shot shows us a close-up of the man on fire, who still heavily resembles Volgan, both in the way he's dressed and the way his body and hands are posed. The hexagonal tiles on the floor here tell us that this is definitely part of the hospital scene. Next up is Ocelot, who is showing off his gun-spinning skills. Not much to analyze here, although we do get a good look at Diamond Dog's own aircraft marshaller. We are then shown a close-up of young Mantis, whose mask has a very similar design to his adult version, from the positioning of the two cylinders, one on the mouth area and another on the left cheek, to the orange-shaded eye lenses. Upon closer inspection, it's also possible to see his eyes through the lenses. It's hard to make out their exact color, but one thing that's clear is that they are definitely a light shade in color based on how clearly visible the pupils are. This is actually very similar to adult Psycho Mantis's eyes from Twin Snakes, which further solidifies that this kid is indeed none other than young Psycho Mantis. Now, the name he is given in Phantom Pain is Treti Rebenok, which was revealed through his figurine's name stand at Comic-Con. One last thing I would like to draw your attention to before we move on is this red cloth-like thing attached to his left shoulder by a strap. A lot of you pointed out that this is actually a red beret. I'm told by fans that it's not uncommon for soldiers to keep their berets tucked away in straps, in belt loops, on trousers, or in lapels when they are not wearing them, so nothing unusual about this apparently. Interestingly enough, an identical beret can also be seen on Eli's left shoulder, worn in exactly the same fashion. What this says to me is that they both belong in some kind of military unit, although I couldn't tell you if they are part of the same one. There is a long list of military units that use red berets from countries all around the world, including America, United Kingdom, Russia, and various countries from Africa and the Middle East. But considering that they are both child soldiers and possess extraordinary qualities, I think that they are indeed part of the same unit, possibly a pseudo-historical one consisting of extraordinary children. Could young Mantis perhaps symbolize one of the children in Lord of the Flies in the same manner that Eli may represent Ralph, the group's leader? Another food for thought. We are then taken to another familiar scene from the E3 2014 trailer, but like with other familiar scenes, the weather and time of the day is a little different, resulting in a different lighting effect. Another major difference is that the E3 2015 version of the scene adds Ocelot and Huey to the background. This is yet another example of a scene in which assets were purposely removed in previous footage to avoid spoilers. It looks like Huey and Big Boss eventually make amends, and Huey ends up joining Diamond Dogs. Moving on, we see Big Boss looking into a mirror, most likely the same one seen towards the beginning of the trailer. You can actually see the cassette player on the counter if you pause at the right moment, which tells me that this is a continuation of this previous scene. Big Boss looks contemplative here, like he's listening to the tape and thinking. Perhaps he eventually hears something surprising, causing him to jolt his head up. Following the scene is a very cool shot of Quiet. My assumption is that this cutscene is either part of her optional storyline or it's something that plays before or after her boss battle. We are then shown another title card, Retaliation Breeds Retaliation, and this one is actually pretty important because it's very similar to one of Liquid's quotes from Metal Gear Solid 1.
After I launch this weapon and get our $1 billion, we'll be able to bring chaos and honor back to this world gone soft. Conflict will breed conflict, new hatreds will arise. Then we'll steadily expand our sphere of influence.
Liquid's goal in MGS1 was to realize Big Boss's dying wish, to create a world of constant conflict so that soldiers will be valued and have a place and purpose in the world. That's what he was referring to when he said that conflicts will breed conflict, and I think this title card might be a reference to that, although I do think that the context here is a little different and more about the concept of revenge, responding to retaliation with retaliation. The title card is then appropriately followed by a shot of Eli jumping into the ST-84 Metal Gear's cockpit, a scene very reminiscent of MGS1. Notice the little hand motion he does before getting in, which is something that adult Liquid does quite often. Anyway, here is a close-up of the cockpit. It definitely looks a little messier and more old-fashioned than Rex, but it's getting there. This is then followed by a scene showing Big Boss being chased by Eli, who has taken control over the ST-84. I love how Big Boss is equipped with a solid snake-like sneaking suit, along with a rocket launcher that reminds me a lot of the Stinger, while Liquid is in the cockpit of a Metal Gear that resembles Rex. This is like one giant reference to MGS1. In the background is the same hangar that Big Boss is led to by Skullface in the E3 2014 trailer, so this is definitely Afghanistan. I wonder how Eli ends up in Afghanistan, since from what I can gather, players will first encounter him in Africa. Also, where the hell is everybody? In the E3 2014 trailer, the hangar is guarded by a bunch of XOF guards and personnel, but here, there doesn't seem to be anyone, although there does seem to be signs of a struggle, as noted by the tipped truck on the left. Now, something that caught my eye about the ST-84, aside from the fact that it gives off this terrifying red glow, are these two white tubes extruding from its chin. There is actually a concept image of it in the special edition packaging video, but I couldn't tell you what it is. Batteries, perhaps? The trailer then cuts to a close-up of Big Boss hanging upside down, being held by the ST-84's mechanical arm while surrounded by the skull's gas, and in comes Skullface to rub it in his face. The kind of relationship they have is just really weird. One minute they are taking a road trip, another they are treating each other like mortal enemies. It's really hard to tell what kind of relationship these two will have. We are then shown the follow-up to the Metal Gear chase scene, where we get to see a very good look at the ST-84's head, which is currently stuck between two land masses. The resemblances it shares with Rex are rather striking, especially when it comes to some of the detailing and patterns on its head, but it's definitely not Rex. Its name is the ST-84 Metal Gear, and judging by the name, it seems to be a preamble of sorts to Outer Heaven's TX-55 Metal Gear from Metal Gear 1. Next up is yet another familiar shot, this time from the E3 2013 trailer, although the lighting and some of the camera movement is a little different this time, for the better in my eyes. Not much else to analyze really, except that this scene probably takes place inside the mine in which the African children are rescued from, which was something that was detailed by a Russian source that attended the MGS5 preview event. The trailer then cuts to the game's title, which is then followed by an extra scene showing Big Boss kneeling in the middle of a bloody hallway. Based on the final scene of the E3 2014 trailer, the only assumption I can make is that it was Big Boss himself who killed all these people. So then the question becomes, how did this conflict start in the first place? I actually think that the infection I talked about earlier might play a large role. If you look at the scene from the E3 2014 trailer, in which Big Boss shoots his own recruits, you will notice that the soldiers attacking Big Boss seem quite delirious, especially this guy who randomly strolls about towards the end. They almost look like they are being mind-controlled, very similarly to the soldiers in the zombie scene shown earlier in the E3 2015 trailer. My theory is that the infection somehow managed to get inside Mother Base, zombifying the Diamond Dog's recruits and forcing Big Boss to kill them. And as I mentioned before, perhaps this infection and the chaos that ensues as a result of it forces the surviving members of Mother Base to pack up their bags and rebuild yet again, this time on land, possibly marking the beginning of Outer Heaven. Now, I did notice that the delirious soldiers in the E3 2014 trailer don't have the faded shade of eyes that Kaz, Code Talker, the African Man, and the Skulls do. I have three possible explanations for this. One is that these soldiers haven't been infected long enough to be afflicted by the eye condition. Two is that this is another example of assets being removed or replaced to avoid spoilers. And three is that my theory is completely wrong and I am full of shit. I'd like to think the answer lies in the first two options, but I could simply be wrong. As for how the infection got in, my prime suspects are Kaz Miller or Code Talker, who perhaps were oblivious about the effects of the infection and how it spreads. Another possibility is that the disease is spread through the African child soldiers that Big Boss rescues. If you look at this scene from the E3 2014 trailer, you can see that the African kid with the afro looks quite sick, showing Big Boss pulling out a knife as if to kill him. Perhaps Big Boss finds out that the kid is infected at one point and is contemplating killing him to prevent the infection from spreading. Perhaps this explains the burned corpses at the beginning of the E3 2014 trailer. Maybe this was done on purpose to eradicate the disease or infection that they were carrying with them. This also makes me think of the burned corpses in this trailer, the ones we see during the road trip. Maybe those corpses belong to people who were experimented with Skullface's infection or parasite. And maybe they were failed experiments or subjects who died while they were being experimented on. And maybe Skullface is burning them to eradicate any evidence and to prevent the infection from spreading or developing in unexpected ways through the corpses. I don't know, I'm just throwing stuff out there. Regardless of the exact details, I am 75% sure there is an infection that plays a large role in causing this massacre, and the biggest proof of this is the way the delirious soldiers that Big Boss shoots at the end of the E3 2014 trailer act very similarly to the zombified soldiers in this scene of the E3 2015 trailer. Now, something that I'm very curious about is if any of this stuff is playable. I honestly don't see why not. This game promises to be much darker than past games, and I don't know what's darker than being forced to massacre your own comrades inside your own base. One last thing I would like to note about this scene is that many people pointed out its resemblance to Gray Fox's hallway scene from MGS1. I certainly see the resemblance. While I don't think this is any indication that our protagonist is Gray Fox, as theorists out there may believe, I do believe that this could perhaps be a reference to that particular scene or to the character. We already saw the trailer referencing MGS1's Liquid Snake multiple times, so I think we will see a lot of fan service like this from this game, both subtle and flamboyant. Moving on, let's discuss the scene that's getting everyone talking. Something that a lot of people noticed is that Skullface here seems to come out of nowhere before disappearing soon after, leading people to believe that maybe Skullface isn't real and that maybe he is a figment of Big Boss's imagination, which might explain why the title card Phantoms Breed Destruction appears right before this scene, or why Skullface is given the description of a ghost without a past. I would like to start by saying that I don't believe that Skullface never existed. Ground Zeroes clearly establishes him as a physical entity. He's there, he speaks, he interacts with people, and people react to him. Also, his title card in Ground Zeroes isn't a ghost without a past, it's Commander of the XOF, Identity Unknown. He's real, folks, and not just in Ground Zeroes, but also in Phantom Pain. If we take a look at this scene from the short trailer, which I'll be analyzing later, you can see Skullface physically interacting with Huey. Ghosts cannot do that. Now, that doesn't mean that he can't eventually become a figment of Big Boss's imagination. Maybe Big Boss gets his revenge and kills Skullface at some point in the game, and maybe Skullface somehow becomes a part of his psyche, making Big Boss see hallucinations of him from time to time. So while I don't believe that Skullface was always a ghost or hallucination, I do believe it's possible he becomes one eventually. Another possibility is that this is all some kind of optical illusion. I mean, let's face it, there are a lot of obstacles here, from the soldier standing in formation to this lower level on the platform, from which he could have easily come from, and Big Boss takes up a lot of space in the frame, so who's to say that this wasn't shot in such a way that made Skullface seem as though he was appearing and disappearing out of nowhere. But if I'm perfectly honest with you, I'm leaning towards Skullface being a figment of Big Boss's imagination for this particular segment. I am at 65% for hallucination and 45% for optical illusion. Now, before moving on, I would also like to talk about a few other noteworthy things about this scene. First up, we have Big Boss's battlesuit. Fortunately, there is no need for me to analyze it since you can see it fully in action in the latest Phantom Pain gameplay demo, so be sure to check that out. I also noticed that recruits will also wear custom emblems, not just Big Boss, which is a neat feature. Furthermore, it looks like soldiers will wear a variety of attires. Notice how there are some soldiers here wearing red berets. Could this mean that Mother Base will feature a ranking system that will dress soldiers appropriately depending on their rank and status? Perhaps the soldiers with the red berets have higher stats and are higher in rank than the ones without it. Or perhaps players will be able to customize the outfit and gear of specific soldiers as they please, and maybe they will appear in cutscenes as customized. One last thing I would like to point out before moving on is the Metal Gear in the background. This is probably the Metal Gear that players will be customizing in the game, or one version of it. Now, is it just me, or does this look like a chunkier and more old-fashioned looking version of Metal Gear Ray? It's got similarly shaped thighs, and it's even got arms that somewhat look like Ray's fins. Then again, this shot doesn't really give us a full good view of the mech, so I might see a completely different image with a better camera angle. For example, if we freeze the video here, you can see that the arm has a crane-like quality to it, and you can also see that it's attached on top of the thighs, which is pretty weird and different, and definitely unlike Ray. But again, I don't know, I would have to get a better view of this Metal Gear. We come full circle in this next shot as we are taken back to the mirror. I'm thinking that this shot happens much later, as noted by the fact that Big Boss's horn has grown dramatically. There are also some minor differences on the mirror counter that indicate passage of time. For example, the cassette tape is no longer in the Walkman, and the grenade rod is gone as well. The imagery that this establishes is very clear, likening Big Boss to a demon or even the devil, aka Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies himself. It's a look that Big Boss doesn't particularly seem to enjoy seeing, as he proceeds by punching the mirror reflecting his inner demon. One little nitpick I have about this scene is that there is barely any blood on Snake's facial hair, which makes it seem as though the hair was attached after the blood got on his face, so it looks a bit fake. It's not a huge deal, but I think splattering some crimson on the facial hair would go a long way in making this look a bit more realistic. Look at how good it looks when Snake's beard is smudged with ashes along with the rest of his face during the ceremony. It's a small detail that makes a big difference in my opinion. Now, something very peculiar about this shot is that before Big Boss crosses the camera, there seems to be some kind of blue lighting emanating from the left. As soon as Big Boss crosses, the blue lighting disappears. I'm not sure if this is some kind of glitch or if there's any significance to it, but it's something I figured I would point out. On the bottom right is the title of the song used for this trailer, Elegia, which is Spanish for elegy. An elegy is most often associated to a poem or song meant for lamenting the deceased, so Elegia is quite appropriate for this trailer, since it does show a lot of death. I would also like to note that grieving death is also a major part of Phantom Pain, as expressed by the cremation ceremony and the way Big Boss refuses to dump the ashes of his fallen comrades into the sea. Alright folks, one more shot left to analyze for this trailer. They certainly saved the best for last. What initially seems to be an ordinary shot of a somber Eli culminates into the revelation of an identical twin, which is then followed by Big Boss saying, "Les enfants terribles," Zero called it. The intention here is clearly to suggest that these are the twin snakes, Solid and Liquid, aka David and Eli, but I think we are being misled for 3 reasons. One, it is made quite clear in Metal Gear Solid 1 that Solid and Liquid never met prior to the Shadow Moses incident. 2, I highly doubt Kojima, who is known for keeping his cards close to his chest, would ever consider unveiling young Solid Snake through a trailer. And 3, the twins here aren't just very similarly looking, they are unnaturally identical. They both have the same hair color and hairstyle. They are both wearing the exact same clothes, the exact same red berets on the left shoulder, and the exact same necklaces, and they even have the exact same scars on their faces. One thing is being identical twins, but another is being exact replicas of each other. If you ask me, the reality of this scene is that we are actually seeing 2 Elis. How is that even possible, you ask? One possibility is that one of the Elis is Decoy Octopus. Yup, we are going there. The fact of the matter is that we don't really know how old Decoy Octopus was in Metal Gear Solid 1, and we really don't know anything about his past, except that he was born in Mexico, making him pretty much a blank slate. So it's entirely possible that we'll see a younger Decoy Octopus in Phantom Pain, and perhaps he'll disguise himself as Eli at one point for whatever reason. If you think about it, 3 of the 6 members of the Sons of Big Boss have already been confirmed for Phantom Pain: Liquid, Ocelot, and Mantis. So who's to say that we won't see the rest of them? Decoy Octopus's age is unknown, so he could be however many years old Kojima wants him to be. Sniper Wolf was in her 20s in MGS1, meaning she could be as old as 8 years old in Phantom Pain. And Raven was in his 30s in MGS1, so he could be anywhere between 9 and 18 years old. By 1984, all 6 Sons of Big Boss have already been born, so I think there is a good chance we'll see all of them in their youth. And speaking of Sniper Wolf, I think it's very possible that we'll be rescuing her in one of the missions. Wolf was born in Iraqi Kurdistan during a time of conflict between the Kurds and the Iraqi regime, and there was actually a real-life conflict from 1983 to 1985 called the Kurdish Rebellion of 1983, in which Kurdish militias of northern Iraq rebelled against Saddam Hussein. This falls right in line with Phantom Pain's 1984 setting, so perhaps we'll get to visit Iraq at one point to rescue little Sniper Wolf. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked, back to the 2 Elis. So one theory is that Decoy Octopus is at play here. Further validating this theory is the fact that the Eli on the left here seems to have blue eyes instead of the usual green, and Decoy Octopus has blue eyes as well. Maybe disguising eye color is one area that Octopus has yet to master in his younger age. Then again, as I have pointed out before, we have already seen the Fox engine do some weird shit with eye color, especially when it comes to green and blue, so I wouldn't rely too heavily on this. Now, one flaw to the Decoy Octopus theory is that his disguises are known to involve draining the blood of the person he is going to impersonate, like he did with Donald Anderson in Metal Gear Solid 1. For Octopus to disguise himself as Eli, he would literally have to kill him and cause a time paradox. Then again, it's entirely possible that this blood transfusion technique is something that he comes to develop when he becomes older, so this doesn't debunk the theory entirely, but it's still something to keep in mind. Another theory is that one of the Elis is young Psycho Mantis disguising himself using psychic dissimulation. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, check out this footage from the Metal Gear Solid digital graphic novel.
I'm not here. This isn't happening.
Snake, stop!
Damn you to hell! How did you see through it? How did you see through my psychic dissimulation? It was flawless!
It's important to keep in mind that the graphic novel isn't canon, and psychic dissimulation never happens in MGS1 the game, but at least they've toyed around with the idea, so perhaps we'll see something similar in Phantom Pain. I would also like to note that Mantis also wears a red beret on his left shoulder, so there is clearly some connection between the two. Now let's play devil's advocate here for a second. Let's say for argument's sake that the twins here are indeed David and Eli. In that case, the child sitting on the left would have to be David, and the one to the right would have to be Eli, since the former seems to have blue eyes like Solid Snake, and the latter seems to have green eyes like Liquid Snake. Although again, this could just be the Fox engine's lighting acting up again. But still, none of this explains the identical clothes and scars, or the fact that the twins should have never met prior to Shadow Moses. If you ask me, this scene is Kojima's way of hinting that we'll see young Solid Snake without actually showing him. One last thing I would like to note about this shot is that the twins seem to be inside a helicopter, possibly Pequod itself. See this contraption here in the back? That's definitely one of Pequod's chairs. The scene also features a window that is also identical to the one found inside Pequod. So it seems as though Big Boss is transporting these twins somewhere, possibly back to base. Before the trailer ends, we are shown the title card, V has come to, so that's still a thing. Its meaning could be as simple as Venom has come to, or there could be some hidden message in there that we'll discover when we play the game. And that concludes my analysis of the E3 2015 trailer's footage. We are far from done though. It is now time to analyze the narration and dialogue spoken throughout the trailer. The trailer's first dialogue is spoken by Skullface, and it goes as follows.
I was born in a small village. I was still a child when we were raided by soldiers, foreign soldiers. Torn from my elders, I was made to speak their language. With each new post, my masters changed, along with the words they made me speak. With each change, I changed too. My thoughts, personality, how I saw right and wrong. Words can kill.
Something that I find interesting is that Skullface's backstory parallels Big Boss's. Not only is this hinted at with Big Boss transforming throughout Skullface's dialogue about change, some of the things he says pretty much summarizes Big Boss's life experiences. Big Boss began as a simple foot soldier for the United States Army, but later met the boss and became her apprentice. Eventually, they went their separate ways, and Naked Snake would later serve in Major Zero's Fox unit. Then, during the events of Snake Eater, he would be forced to kill the boss, his old mentor. Betrayed and set up by his own government, it was at that point that Snake lost sight of who he was fighting for, along with his patriotism for his country. Thus, he would establish MSF with Kazuhira Miller, an army without borders, and a haven in which nationless soldiers could call home. Big Boss would then relinquish his loyalty to the boss during the events of Peace Walker, and after the destruction of MSF, he would wake up 9 years later to avenge his fallen comrades by whatever means necessary. Like with Skullface, with each new post, his masters changed, and with each change, he changed too. His thoughts, personality, how he saw right and wrong, etc. And Phantom Pain's Big Boss seems to have undergone the most dramatic changes yet. The two entities truly do seem to be alter egos of each other, which is something that is also symbolized through Skullface's unit's XOF logo, which is quite literally a mirror image of the Fox unit logo. Their alter ego relationship is further suggested through imagery like this, in which we see Skullface and Big Boss as both horizontal and vertical reflections of each other. Hard to say how any of this will play into the story and the kind of relationship that the two characters will have, be it adversarial, collaborative, or a mix of both, but it's stuff to keep in mind. Moving on, Skullface's backstory is further fleshed out by Ocelot.
Time and again, the country was ruled by a foreign tongue. When he was a young boy, he lost his native language, the bedrock for any developing child. His country, his family, his face, his identity, everything was stolen from him.
A lot of this dialogue, along with Skullface's, paints a very similar picture to the backstory that Skullface provided in one of Ground Zero's cassette tapes. Here are some tidbits for comparison.
I didn't die. My family died. My country died. But they didn't take me with them. All hell took from me was this skin. This outer peel that marked me human. They should let the poor thing die. Those are the only words of my mother tongue I remember. It was the language of my village. Until foreign troops invaded. Then the last identity I had left, the words I spoke, were pulled from me. I've never known choice. Where I was born, the language I speak, I've never had the freedom to choose for myself.
So, very familiar stuff. Now, something that bothers me a bit about Ocelot's dialogue is that he sounds different than I remember him from previous footage. Troy Baker's performance here doesn't seem to have the same deepness and gruff, and he puts on this weird, subtle southern accent.
Afghanistan is a big place. I expect you'll become quite familiar with those binoculars as you plan your next move.
Time and again, the country was ruled by a foreign tongue.
I personally prefer the deeper and gruffer version of Ocelot, so I hope they'll keep it that way in the final game. Next up is dialogue spoken by Code Talker.
Since ancient times, every civilization's ruler has had the same idea. When people unite under one will, they become stronger than the sum of their parts. And what do rulers use to bring people together? Language.
The message itself is pretty clear, but there are also some underlying references here, particularly concerning Zero and the Patriots. The ruler in this message is definitely Zero, who founded the Patriots for the sole purpose of fulfilling his interpretation of the boss's will, to unite and govern the world under one rule. And based on Code Talker's dialogue, it seems as though Zero's plan to fulfill this goal will involve language. This is then directly followed by dialogue from Zero himself.
This world will become one. I have found the way. Race, tribal affiliations, national borders, even our faces will be irrelevant. The world that the boss envisioned will finally become a reality, and it will make mankind whole again.
Notice how his ideals and goals match Code Talker's definition of a ruler, except Zero's goal isn't to rule over a civilization, but rather the whole world and make mankind whole again through the use of the mass funds from the philosopher's legacy and through the veil of his organization, the Patriots. Zero has diluted himself to believe that this is the world that the boss envisioned. Now, notice how Zero never mentions language in the list of things that will become irrelevant, further proving that it's a part of his plan. And as I mentioned before, as he's talking about the world that the boss envisioned, the camera pans towards the AI pod, which could quite possibly be indicating that this is none other than the mammal pod. The next dialogue is spoken by Skullface.
America is a country of liberty, a meeting of immigrants. Instead of simply assimilating, its citizens live alongside others. So the Major sought a system that used information, words, to control the subconscious.
Basically, what he's trying to say is that America is a country in which all ethnic groups can freely live together, which is why the Major sought a system that used information, or words, to control the subconscious. Skullface is clearly referring to Major Zero when he says the Major, and this dialogue is further confirmation that words and language are part of Zero's plan for world domination. I also believe that this system that uses information might be foreshadowing or alluding to the Patriots AI network that would be created in the 2000s, more specifically GW, which was specifically designed to control the flow of information. Obviously, that's many years away, but I'm sure the idea has been floating around for a while before the technology caught up to allow its implementation, especially when you consider that AIs is something that Cypher has already toyed with during the events of Peace Walker with the AI pods, which happen to have the same names as the various parts of the Patriots AI. But I think because technology hasn't caught up yet, with digital information not being mainstream, Zero will opt for the next best thing until then, something to do with language and words to control the subconscious. This is just my interpretation and theory though. This is then directly followed by dialogue from Ocelot regarding Skullface.
In his eyes, the greatest symbiotic parasite the world's ever known isn't microbial. It's linguistic. Words are what keeps civilization, our world, alive. Free the world, not by taking men's lives, but by taking their tongues.
The first thing that caught my attention are the words symbiotic, parasite, and microbial, which are more signs that some kind of infection will indeed play a role in phantom pain. But according to Ocelot, microbial isn't the greatest symbiotic parasites in Skullface's eyes, but rather linguistic. It seems to me as though Skullface's goals are the complete opposite of Zero's. Whereas Zero wants to unite the world through language, Skullface wants to free the world by getting rid of it. Further confirmation of this is given by Skullface himself in his next bit of dialogue.
With this, I'll rid the world of infestation. Sans lingua franca, the world will be torn asunder, and then it shall be free.
Sans lingua franca can be translated as without common language, so what he's saying is that without common language, the world will be torn asunder and set free, thereby ridding the world of infestation. My take on all this is that Skullface is planning to use lesser infestations like symbiotic parasites and microbials, possibly the ones used to create the skulls and the ones that Kaz, Code Talker, and the African man might be infected with, to get rid of what he believes to be the greatest infestation of them all, language. I think it's possible that this infection of his has the ability to deprive people of their words in the long run. Maybe that's what the infected African man's cut throat was alluding to. And there's also Quiet, a sniper deprived of her words. I've already presented ample evidence that she might be associated with the skulls, possibly a subject of the parasite unit experiment who managed to get away before she was fully zombified. But maybe she was far enough into the process that she got herself some powers while losing her ability to speak, which may be part of the effects of the infection or parasite. This is all very broad speculation on my part, but when words like symbiotic parasite, microbial, and infestation keep popping up, I can't help but think that I'm onto something with the infection theories that I've discussed. What I do know for sure is that Skullface's ultimate goal is to free the world, to fulfill his own version of liberation. In fact, this is something that is hinted at in Chico's 7th cassette tape from Ground Zeroes.
First Big Boss, then Zero. Liberation is at hand.
Skullface then speaks again later in the trailer, stating the following.
The chain of retaliation is what will truly bind this world together as one.
The chain of retaliation somewhat reminds me of the title card, Retaliation Breeds Retaliation. This actually sounds a lot like Big Boss's reason for establishing Outer Heaven. His goal was quite literally to create an endless cycle of conflict and war so that soldiers would be valued, so that they would belong in the world. After his demise, it would be Liquid Snake who would pick up the mantle. Skullface's dialogue here seems to suggest that he has similar intentions. Perhaps it's the combination of similar histories and ideals that eventually breeds a companionship between Big Boss and Skullface. Last but not least is the dialogue spoken by Big Boss himself.
Les enfants terribles, Zero called it.
Not only does he mention the project that would create his sons, but he also mentions Zero's name. This dialogue alone makes it clear that Solid and Liquid Snake will play a part in the story, and that the conflict between Zero and Big Boss, one that would bring the world towards the brink of destruction, will be fleshed out. And thus concludes my analysis of Phantom Pain's E3 2015 trailer dialogue. The last part of this video is my analysis of the short E3 2015 trailer. Let's not waste any more time and dive right into it. The first scene is straight from the long trailer and is quite literally identical, so nothing to analyze here. Next up, we have a scene showing a battalion of tanks and choppers, the same one from the E3 2014 trailer, except this one takes place at night. Like before, they are shooting at something, although I couldn't tell you what. Now here's an interesting scene showing a Metal Gear housed within what is undoubtedly Mother Base's interior. This could very well be another version of the Metal Gear we'll be customizing for our own base. On the top left here is Huey Emmerich, who is standing on two legs with the aid of these mechanical walkers. I think it's safe to assume that Huey will reprise his role as the scientist that will help Big Boss build his army's very own Metal Gear. Speaking of this new Metal Gear, there are some interesting things to note about it. First of all, notice how it has 4 legs, which is very reminiscent of Peace Walker's quadrupedal design. It's like Peace Walker and Zeke had a baby or something. Now, if you recall, Peace Walker could also transform into a bipedal configuration, so maybe Huey will draw inspiration from that and give Snake the option to swap between 2-legged and 4-legged versions. Something else that I noticed is that this Metal Gear does not have a cockpit. Instead, perched at the top of the mech is none other than D-Walker. They basically took D-Walker, removed its arms and legs, and then inserted it into a custom-made slot. It looks like for this particular Metal Gear, Snake will be mounting it like he would with D-Walker. I also think that D-Walker being the centerpiece of this Metal Gear is indication that the machine will be deployable in the field, allowing players to pilot their own customized weapon of mass destruction. That's one thing that Peace Walker didn't have. Players could make their own custom Metal Gear, but they couldn't take it for a spin. In fact, the only reason for customizing Zeke at all was so that Paz could use it against you. I think Phantom Pain will rectify that. I think this time it is us, the players, who will be kicking ass with it. Obviously, they would have to implement serious monetary and ranking consequences to ensure that it doesn't end up being overpowered. But I think giving players the option to wreck shit with their own Metal Gear would be awesome. This would also allow for some cool scenarios, like Metal Gear versus Metal Gear battles. There's a lot of potential there. Moving on, we have a brief scene showing Kaz handing an assault rifle to somebody. It looks like there's still enough left of Kaz's right arm to allow him to hold large objects under the armpit. As for when and where this scene takes place, I think it's part of this scene from the E3 2014 trailer. Notice how the rifle is exactly the same as the one that the African kid gets a hold of. And notice how both scenes feature a soldier standing guard on Kaz's left-hand side. This particular shot probably happens after the African kid points the weapon at Kaz. Notice how the rifle in this scene doesn't have a magazine, which has me thinking that they managed to strip the weapon away from the kid and remove the magazine just to be safe. Next up is a shot from the TGS 2014 D-Dog cutscene, and it's pretty much identical except that the weather's slightly different. Snake is wearing a fatigue instead of his sneaking suit. His right shoulder sleeve insignia is a custom-made DD1 instead of MSF's, and the camera movement and positioning is slightly different. We are then shown another brand new shot with Snake and Quiet inside a chopper. From the looks of it, something is burning back there, so my assumption is that a crash is imminent. This shot likely happens right before this scene from the long trailer, in which the chopper is spinning out of control, which is then followed by Snake and Quiet in front of a crashed chopper surrounded by skulls and zombified soldiers. One last thing I would like to point out is that if you freeze at the right time, you get a glimpse of what Snake would look like if he was high as a kite. Maybe that's what he looks like while he's smoking phantom cigars and he just doesn't know it. Okay, I'm just fucking around. We are then shown a rather shady shot of Kaz and Ocelot, who are likely in the middle of torturing someone. I'm beginning to realize that the tortures might be taking place inside the room with the rioting soldiers. Notice how the railing on both scenes are identical. Furthermore, there's that very familiar red lighting, which I think might be emanating from an active mammal pod towards the left side of the room. The next shot shows us the battalion of soldiers in Africa that I referenced before, the same ones who will become zombified by the skulls at some point. Alongside them are 2 Walker Gears, one of which is equipped with some lethal-looking rocket launchers. In case you haven't watched my MGS5 preview compilation video, there is a difference between Walker Gears and D-Walker. While they are both very similar-looking miniature bipedal mechs, Walker Gears are the original version of the weapon, and they are used by the enemies. Prior to getting D-Walker, the only way to use these bipedal mechs is by hijacking one from the enemy. Eventually, Snake will get access to his own miniature mech, and that's D-Walker, which basically takes the design of the Walker Gear and enhances it with a bunch of new features. For example, instead of using face shields for the head, D-Walker employs a robotic head with smart functionality such as search mode, which was shown off in the E3 2015 gameplay demo. Furthermore, D-Walker features wheels on the back of its forelegs instead of stands like Walker Gears do, allowing it to switch from walking mode to what I like to call skating mode. There is also the fact that D-Walker is far more customizable than Walker Gear, featuring its own tech tree that will allow you to retrofit the mechanical support buddy with a fighting style that you see fit. Think of D-Walker as Walker Gears on steroids, taking the original design and making it better and more versatile, retrofitted specifically for Snake. This is then followed by a very cool shot showing Snake and Quiet practicing some CQC. This cutscene is also likely part of Quiet's optional support buddy storyline. Now, before I move on, I'd like to commend Kojima and company for not taking any shortcuts with the animation. If you slow the footage down and zoom in, you will be able to find some very minute details in animation that are just incredible in my opinion. Here, for example, notice how naturally Quiet's fingers react and unfold as Snake's hand slides through them to disarm the knife away from Quiet. I also noticed that Snake is taking advantage of his bionic wrist's ability to rotate beyond the human range of motion to perform this disarming move. These small little details will likely zip past most of you, but I think they are worth commending. In the next scene, Quiet is accompanied by Code Talker, confirming that he'll be recruitable for Mother Base. Before that though, much like Quiet and Huey, it seems as though Code Talker will also be undergoing torture, and from the looks of it, it seems as though Quiet has already undergone torture, judging by how tired and sweaty she looks. One last thing I noticed is that Code Talker's head turns towards Quiet, as if to look at her. This tells me that, like Kaz, Code Talker may not be blind despite the faded eyes, but rather afflicted by some kind of infection. The trailer then cuts to another new scene, this time showing Snake running away from heavy artillery fire. If I had to guess, I would say that Snake is running away from the ST-84 Metal Gear being piloted by Eli, which I'm sure comes with machine guns. Notice how the location is the same as the scene with a battalion of tanks, featuring the same scaffolding and structures. We even get to see an idle tank on the right side here. If Snake is indeed being chased by the ST-84 here, then it's safe to assume that this road leads to the hangar housing the Metal Gear. Something else that I noticed about this scene is this irregularity of Snake holding 3 primary weapons, 1 back weapon and 2 hip weapons, one holstered on his hip and another in his right hand. Gameplay-wise, he should only be able to hold 1 hip weapon and 1 back weapon for a grand total of 2. This makes me wonder if Snake will eventually be able to hold 3 primary weapons after certain upgrades. Do keep in mind, however, that this could just be a cutscene thing. This next scene is identical to the one found in the long trailer, so let's skip that and take a look at this shot showing the male skulls during daylight. The overall hue here makes it quite clear that this cutscene takes place somewhere in Afghanistan. We are then taken to another familiar shot, except this time Snake is no longer splattered with blood and is wielding a smaller rocket launcher. Everything else is pretty much identical. Then here's the scene that I referenced a while back, where we see Skullface having a rough chat with Huey in front of the hangar housing the ST-84 Metal Gear. Again, I think this is proof that Skullface does indeed exist as a physical entity through at least parts of Phantom Pain. We are then shown a very cool close-up of young Mantis and the man on fire. This makes it clear that the two are definitely associated, with Mantis possibly having direct control over the creature. Most intriguing about this scene is that the two are standing in the hangar housing the ST-84 Metal Gear, which can be seen in the background here, and to the right are 2 XOF soldiers minding their own business. Could this be indication that these two are somehow associated with XOF, creations of Skullface perhaps? After all, we do get to see them both being labeled as part of a group called Those Who Don't Exist in the E3 2013 trailer, alongside the Skulls, who have been confirmed to be part of Skullface's army. Next up is yet another scene from the long trailer, but with a few noteworthy differences this time. First, the weather is now rainy instead of sunny. You can even see droplets of water on the camera, which is pretty cool. Another big difference is that Snake is wearing a fatigue and isn't all bloodied up. We are then taken to an unknown location with some intense lens flares. Something interesting that I noticed are these cables on the floor here, which remind me of the ones found in the room with the sick African man. So my guess is that this might be the same location, perhaps a facility that Skullface is using to experiment with his microbials. I also noticed that the camera movement for this shot are almost identical to this scene from the E3 2014 trailer, but they seem to be 2 different locations. This reminds me of the 2 similar shots showing Pequod flying through Afghanistan and Africa. Perhaps this is another type of intro or outro style cutscene that is recycled in certain moments. Next up is yet another familiar scene, and this one is identical to the one in the long trailer, so nothing to analyze here. This next shot is also very familiar, believe it or not, but it's undergone some dramatic changes. This is without a doubt a reworked version of Skullface's intro shot from the E3 2013 trailer. Differences include the camera work, which zooms in now instead of zooming out, a different time of the day, late morning or early afternoon instead of dusk or dawn, and a completely different color for the chopper, white instead of dark green. The new camera work also allows us to see things like the XOF logo on the chopper's tail. It's also now possible to see that this helipad resides near land. I initially thought that this scene took place in Mother Base because the helipad looks very similar, but I'm beginning to think that might not be the case. If you look at any footage of Mother Base, you can see that there is absolutely no land to be seen nearby. So where could this be? I have two theories. Either this is one of XOF's base of operations, or this is Outer Heaven. Keep in mind that Outer Heaven is established 200 kilometers north of the southernmost tip of Africa, so it would make sense to see land nearby. Perhaps this is the base that is established after Mother Base's second downfall, possibly as a result of the infection. This is then followed by another familiar scene being shown during a different time of the day. Apart from the time, another difference is that Big Boss is not bloodied up in this one. And once again, judging by the hue, I'm going to assume that this cutscene takes place in Afghanistan. Last but not least, after the game's title screen, we are shown a rather fun scene in which Quiet uses her sniper rifle to light up Big Boss's cigar from afar. I think this is another optional support buddy storyline cutscene, and judging by the playful nature of this cutscene, it seems as though the bond between Quiet and Big Boss has come a long way. Something I would like to point out here is that Venom Snake also smokes real cigars, not just electronic ones. The reason I'm even mentioning this is because there are those who believe that the Snake who is riding the motorcycle at the end of the GDC 2013 trailer is the real Big Boss, while Venom Snake is Grey Fox disguised as Big Boss because the former smokes real cigars like the real Big Boss would, while the latter only smokes e-cigars like a poser. Well, with this one scene, that part of the theory has been completely disproved. Both of them smoke real cigars like the real Big Boss would. Hell, they even make the same sound when they blow smoke. This is further confirmation that they are all the same Big Boss we all know and love, with no foul play involved. And with that, I would like to end this analysis. Thank you for tuning in. Now, with me being human and all, I am bound to make mistakes or miss something, so don't be afraid to point out any corrections or suggestions in the comments below. I would also love to hear your theories, since the vague and cryptic nature of this trailer allows it to be seen and interpreted in many ways. And to be further updated on Metal Gear Solid 5, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Eong out.